This is The Truth in a Word, Hebrew for the Soul, with a 10-minute truth. Visit me at www.truthinaword.com. And remember to like, comment, subscribe, and grow.
If you had a time travel machine, what time would you go to? Oddly enough, I've thought about this a lot. And I would go all the way back to the beginning of humanity, of modern humanity. I'd want to know how we've gotten to where we are. And I mean the good and the bad. I want to know how we've developed the best of ourselves and how we have developed the worst of ourselves. And I believe that to know that we need to know where we've been. And since I don't have a time machine, I decided that I was going to learn this through deep study of the ancient Hebrew language and culture. One, because I identify with that culture very closely. But the second reason is because there's a lot of ancient Hebrew text that's readily available to us via the internet that I believe can help us to know where we've been and even perhaps where we are going. So this is my time travel machine. And it allows me to see the world through the eyes of an ancient civilization whose ideals, language, customs, and beliefs have in some way spread across hundreds of generations into every single continent on this planet, with religion as its vehicle. So whether or not you're religious, it doesn't really matter. The historical and the cultural context and the learning experience itself is so enlightening to the student of ancient Hebrew language. So in a series of short 10-minute videos, I am going to attempt to teach you everything that I've learned about this intriguing ancient language and culture. My name is Deshina, and this is The Truth in a Word's 10-minute truth. Thanks for traveling through time with me. Have you ever really thought about language? How other languages might differ from your own? Whether or not symbols or alphabets of other languages have meanings and are put together in meaningful ways to communicate complex thoughts and ideas. And did you know that there are more than 450 English translations of the Bible, most of which would be better defined as interpretations? In this video, you'll learn how differences like these make way for the more than 450 ways to communicate the ancient Hebrew text that makes up the Old Testament. These are just a few of the ancient symbols once used to communicate the ancient Hebrew wisdoms we now read in our Bibles. Each simple picture answers what something is, what it does, and how to pronounce its sound. But over time, these pictures have evolved into modern script we see today. This is true for all ancient languages. They developed from hieroglyphic and pictographic cave drawings to the alphabetical symbols we know. In fact, some English characters come from Latin, which comes from Greek, which comes from Hebrew or Phoenician, and in that sense, we can see and hear connections to the ancient Hebrew language and English sounds and words we use now. In fact, there is evidence of a relationship between modern and ancient languages to Hebrew. For example, the Egyptian hieroglyphic for rope is the same as the Paleo-Hebrew symbol for twist. And its I symbol is also the same for Paleo-Hebrew. The Phoenician and Paleo-Hebrew symbol for mem, the equivalent of the English M, are identical. The same is true for the Aramaic and modern Hebrew letter Kof, which are equivalent to the English Q. Then we have the meaning and pronunciation of the Chinese word qi and the ancient Hebrew ki or chi, both meaning life. Pel or fel and fall means fall. How could such connections exist across language families? Do all languages have a common origin? Let's see. Do all modern humans have a common origin? Despite these similarities, there are, of course, many more differences from one language to another. Perhaps the most important of these to recognize the difference between ancient and Eastern versus Western cultures. The distinction is important because the culture of these two otherwise superficial designations are drastically different. And how we interpret language is heavily dependent on how we interpret culture. For example, a kiss on the cheek in America is only appropriate in a very limited set of circumstances. But in some Eastern cultures, it's as common as a handshake. So let's say that you're an American English scribe interpreting a cheek kiss from an Eastern text. You're probably going to assume that the person being kissed shared an intimate connection with the person that did the kissing. And your interpretation of the text going forward is going to be based on this perceived intimate connection between these two characters. But what if this is a stranger in whose culture a kiss on the cheek is like a handshake? How is your entire interpretation affected by this cultural misalignment? Well, it's going to depend on what else was said about these two characters, but you can see how this can be a problem. The safest bet is to avoid making assumptions at all and to just communicate what's there. But this is not how most translations of ancient Hebrew texts function. And if it did, we'd have a much harder time building unjust doctrine around ancient Hebrew text. There are four primary differences that we should keep in mind as we study ancient Hebrew. First, a letter name tells us everything that we need to know about that letter. It tells us what it is, how it sounds, and what it does. For example, El was represented in ancient times by the ox's head. The ox was a representation of energy because it was used to carry heavy loads, to plow the fields, and to transport things that were too heavy for humans to carry. So it represents energy. El makes the sound, represents energy, which energizes. Second, Hebrew letters are actually syllabic, meaning each letter represents a syllable that has its own consonant sound and vowel sound, with the exception of the vowel sounds themselves, such as L. That is, in English, we say p, b, la, n. In Hebrew, we say pe, be, la, nu. Third, words are not the equivalent of English words. Instead, Hebrew words are usually phrases or statements. In English, the and energy are two separate and independent words. In Hebrew, ha'el is a combination of a prefix, ha, meaning the, and el, the word for energy. In ancient times, this would be understood as manifested energy that guides. And we, in modern times, should translate it as the energy or the power. Instead, we interpret it as the God or God. Fourth, sentences do not follow English grammar rules, although they do sometimes have similar elements. In English, we say the energy will be strong. In Hebrew, we say Yahai Gedal Ha'el. He will exist great, the energy. Whereas both sentences have the subject, the energy, however, they are placed in different locations. As with English and other Western languages, modern Hebrew assumes Hebrew consonants make vowel-free sounds like b versus be, and therefore requires vowel pointing. But ancient Hebrew has its own vowel sounds that do not require additional help. In fact, there are 5 Hebrew letters that are almost identical to English vowel sounds. Those make the sounds e, a, u, a. When combined with each other, vowel sounds can create long vowel sounds, such as a, e, I, o, u. These are called glides. So, even modern and ancient Hebrew are fundamentally different. Also, since the interpretation of a word is completely dependent on which letters are present and where it is in the word, adding and removing letters, and thus sounds, can completely change the interpretation of an ancient Hebrew word. Likewise, if the ed or the s is removed from the end of an English word that is intended to be past tense or plural, it will change our understanding of that statement, and it may also change how we respond to it. The same is true, but to a greater extent, for ancient Hebrew. For example, ekal simply means eat, but okal means one who is eaten, such as food. Likewise, yakal means he will complete, but yaekal means he will eat. Adding and removing these sounds can completely change the interpretation of a Hebrew word. Still, ancient Hebrews would read these combinations of symbols and understand it to be the energy physically guided. That is, to manipulate or to make use of physical energy, which is to eat. Or they would see okal, and they would understand this to mean that which is manipulated for physical energy, which is food. And when they'd see yaekal, they would understand this to mean the act of manipulating physical energy. And this is an act committed by a particular individual. In other words, he will eat.
So, what are some of our takeaways? First, no matter where we look, we'll probably find similarities in languages. But the differences are also very important, and they may be key to how we interpret Biblical Hebrew more accurately. Second, while modern Hebrew dialects, which were developed in 1947, share many things in common with the ancient Hebrew language, even these are no perfect substitute for knowing the language and culture of the ancient people who originally wrote the manuscripts we now recognize as the Bible. Nonetheless, knowing these languages would make it easier to learn ancient Hebrew. Eastern languages cannot be held to Western language standards and cultural ideals. So as we study this language, our minds must remain open to the fact that the Westerners who translated the ancient texts in the 1600s were missing a key ingredient: cultural context. And instead, they attributed Western cultural context to ancient Eastern and African language. Hence, we get the word God, and we get stories of angels, giants, demons, serpents, dragons, human gods and goddesses, and so on and so forth, which are mostly based on misnomers and misaligned cultural references. Once familiar, though, the cool thing is that you'll be able to notice immediately when a piece of text has been changed, edited, or inserted because the rules will change. Remember that the manuscripts were written over the course of several generations by different people from different areas who spoke different dialects, and so the rules will change. But for now, we'll keep it simple. We'll start with the fundamental truths that will not change, which are the letters and their meanings, and we'll take it from there. So I'll see you in the next 10-minute truth. Visit me at www.truthinaword.com, and remember to like, comment, subscribe, and grow.